So my name is Andrew Meeker, and I am the North Carolina coordinator for the East Coast Greenway Alliance. So I am in charge of building out the East Coast Greenway across North Carolina. In this past year, which was my first year on the job, there was much happening in North Carolina, and so it's hard to narrow down to three highlights, but I was thinking about three different stages of Greenway progression that I would share. So the first is around funding, and something exciting happened in North Carolina is that we were awarded a RAISE grant. RAISE grants are discretionary grants from USDOT that are awarded in a cycle, and they've been called different things in different administrations, such as BUILD and Tiger previously. But so in Elizabeth City, they applied for a RAISE grant to do a planning study for a corridor that would be sort of a complete street, multimodal reimagination of that corridor. It goes by the university and it goes by several other businesses, and it's used by transit, and it would also include a multi-use or shared use path on which the East Coast Greenway would route. So we applied for that, or Elizabeth City applied for that in, I guess, April, and we were awarded in maybe August the funds, about $2 million for a planning study to plan that corridor. And so that was really exciting, and it's an example of how the East Coast Greenway can bring federal funds into local areas as an investment. The second highlight is around the kind of planning process and development of new East Coast Greenway Trail. And this year we started and completed a feasibility study in Johnston County for the East Coast Greenway segment between Clayton and Smithfield. And so I think it's about a 16-mile stretch that had many potential routes. It roughly follows the Neuse River. And this is exciting because currently through the Triangle Metro region in Durham, Raleigh, there's about 74 or so miles of East Coast Greenway, the vast majority of which is on trail. And so this study picks off where the kind of southern terminus of that ends in Clayton. And so this would sort of extend it further south about 16 miles. And so with a lot of work with the community and with our really skilled consultants who are leading the study and the leadership in Johnston County, we came up with a final route, and as well as some alternative routes and important connections to other local municipalities that are along the way, such as Selma, going through Wilson Mills. And this will lay the groundwork for us to be able to begin developing the trail and putting money towards it and applying for funding and grants. And so it's exciting to have that vision really laid out. The third highlight in the North Carolina region is a completed segment, the Gorman Street connector in the city of Raleigh. So the Gorman Street is a small but mighty segment. It's really a critical link in two important trails in Raleigh, the Rocky Branch Trail and the Reedy Creek Greenway. And so there is this 0.3, 0.4 mile stretch that went over an overpass and on a busy street that had inadequate bicycle pedestrian facilities. And in this short amount of time, or a short span of space rather, the project took a long amount of time, but in the short space, they improved two busy intersections. They have a wide side path on either end. They have a sidewalk next to a cycle track sandwiched with kind of buffer and flex post bollard protected cycle track right in the middle over the overpass. So there's a lot going on in a short span of space. But what it does is a connection that used to be dangerous is now enjoyable to ride. And it is one more sort of filling in a small gap to have a continuous East Coast Greenway across North Carolina and across the East Coast. So looking into the new year, looking towards 2023, there is a lot that we're excited about with the East Coast Greenway in North Carolina. But the big exciting thing that's happening is in North Carolina, 2023 was declared Year of the Trail by the North Carolina General Assembly, the state legislature. And it is the 50th anniversary of the State Trail Act. And in order to sort of celebrate the roles that trails play in North Carolina for our communities, we're having a years-long statewide celebration. And it's being hosted and coordinated by the Great Trail State Coalition, of which the East Coast Greenway is a member. And so we've played a role in building up North Carolina as the Great Trail State. And we're going to be able to showcase that across the entire year of 2023 in North Carolina. And so what that means is that groups like the East Coast Greenway and our trail partners across the state, as well as local municipalities and community groups, anyone can participate in Year of the Trail and hold events on trails, including the East Coast Greenway, as well as natural surface hiking trails and paddle trails and equestrian trails and trails that are accessible, and all sorts of any muscle powered trail is being celebrated. And what we hope from this is that we will build both support among the people of North Carolina, as well as from the leaders, both local elected officials and our state legislature, support for trails and recognition of North Carolina as the Great Trail State, showcasing and highlighting the role that trails play for North Carolina. And through doing so, bring more resources towards development of trail and maintenance of trails in North Carolina. And so we're going to have events on the East Coast Greenway. And if you have ideas for events or want to host an event, we encourage you to reach out to the Great Trail State Coalition or reach out to me with East Coast Greenway Alliance. And we would love to have your event as a part of the Year of the Trail. Another thing I'm excited about for 2023 in North Carolina is the Complete the Trails Fund. And in the 2021 legislative session, North Carolina designated about $29.5 million towards the development of state trails. And so there's 12 state trails that are under the state park system, and the East Coast Greenway is one of those state trails. And so we have access to some funding that will be really critical, both in continuing to plan and design and develop and build the East Coast Greenway in North Carolina, and hopefully be able to leverage that state funding in order to bring in further federal investment, as well as other access to resources to build out the East Coast Greenway in North Carolina. And so we have this past year developed a 5-year plan for the East Coast Greenway in North Carolina. And we're going to be revamping that next year to make it even more detailed and more visually engaging, so that we know and our partners know across the state, all the communities that we work with along the East Coast Greenway route, what the vision is for getting the East Coast Greenway done in North Carolina, both using the Complete the Trail funds and beyond that, until we're complete. So I use the East Coast Greenway most often while commuting to and from the East Coast Greenway Alliance office and my home. And so the most frequent time I visit is doing that morning and evening commute when I'm going to the office. And I really treasure that time. I mean, I couldn't imagine having to drive every day, and I really want for everyone to have the option or the possibility to ride or walk or whatever on a beautiful Greenway trail instead of being in a car on the road. And so the 2 times I have really enjoyed most being on the East Coast Greenway during my commute have first been recently. This fall is the first time. I mean, I'm not a year into my position, and so this is the first fall that I've been commuting on the East Coast Greenway on the American Tobacco Trail. And I mean, the colors of the trees and the leaves changing are beautiful. And I also really like riding on all of the dried leaves that are on the ground, and the noise it makes to ride over them. It feels fun and festive and cozy and all sorts of good ways to be riding in the fall. But I think my favorite time to commute, or my favorite part of the commute that feels just the most magical, is in the summer when I was biking home in the evening just before sunset, or when it was, a little later. The wood thrush calls were kind of brought this beautiful sonic element to my ride. Wood thrush is my favorite bird call. And if you're not familiar with what a wood thrush sounds like, they can do this thing with their throat where they can make multiple tones at the same time. And they have this call that sounds like this real ethereal, glassy flute. And so they're creating these multiple tones in this really glassy flute-like noise. And I don't see them, but I'm biking, and just in the woods all around me are these calls of the wood thrush, among many other bird calls. But the wood thrush really stands out for me and makes my commute home feel like I am in some magical land. And it brings a smile to my face, and just an appreciation and love for nature and for the East Coast Greenway that allows me to regularly have that experience. So thanks so much for joining and for hearing some updates and exciting upcoming happenings in North Carolina with the East Coast Greenway. I appreciate you spending this time with me, and I look forward to taking your questions.